So we got a special Patreon listener question today for the Transformer Slag Podcast. This was a question that a fan wanted me to do when we got past 10K subs. And then when we got past 10K subs, he kind of wanted me to wait out on this one a little bit. And, well, today's the day that we're going to be doing his Patreon listener question. And this is a Patreon listener question from Billy B., one of our very first patrons that we had, definitely in our top 3 that we got all those years ago that joined the Patreon. And again, if you want to join the Patreon like Billy B and help support the podcast, again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. You know how it goes. But Billy B wanted me to do this one because it's kind of a reflection of the Transformer Slag Podcast and all that we've done throughout the years and everything. And so let's read that question. Let's go through it and break it down. Hey, Proto Man, congrats on getting the 10K subs. I got a Transformer Slag Podcast Patreon listener question for you. Where does Proto Man and the Transformer Slag Podcast begin? That is to ask, I've heard from many people that you've been a part of BotCon, meeting with many people behind the scenes, responsible for our hobby and the fandom, your vast knowledge of just about anything Transformers, but I want to know about those moments memorable to you and your involvement within the fandom and what inspired the podcast, as well as the people that you have touched, as well as the people that have touched you within the fandom and stories like that. A reflection of where you have been and where you see yourself going with the podcast in the future. Thank you for all the amazing content you have given us, Billy B. Well, thank you for the super kind words, Billy B, and being a longtime loyal member to the Transformer Slag Podcast Patreon and all the love and support that you have given us. Wow. Where do I even begin? So let's break this down. Memorable moments. Well, there's a lot. You know, I've been part of the online fandom of Transformers as early as the internet has existed. You know, obviously you could argue, oh, the internet's been around technically since the 80s, but I got the internet in 1994, 95, and I literally, one of the first things that I did when I got the internet in 94, 95 was jump onto any forums or message boards I could find about Transformers. And that was right in the transition into Beast Wars. And I've been part of that fandom ever since. I mean, those messages are probably archived somewhere in a Google search, but they're there. They're there. And I just, if you would have told that Proto Man back then, you know, that young, you know, teenager, and then later on that young adult in the early 2000s, the teenager in the 90s and the young adult in the early 2000s, the things that he would have seen, accomplished, and done today would have been almost unfathomable. You know, you wouldn't even be able to imagine it. Whether it be you know, having hotel room parties with Scott McNeil, the voice of Beast Wars, you know, Rat Trap and Dinobot, to having casual lunches with the writers or creators or voice actors multiple times. It's nuts when I think about it. I mean, I'm reminded of just chilling and having a casual lunch and just relaxing with David Kay, the voice of Beast Wars Megatron, and David Wise, the writer for so much Transformer content and other cartoons that I loved in the 90s. Rest in peace, David Wise. Love that dude. You know, just amazing stuff like that. Going out and hanging out with Aaron Archer and Derek Wyatt and all those friendships that were created from that, lifelong friendships. Again, rest in peace, Derek Wyatt. Sad, you know, when you've been in this fandom so long, people come and go. It's crazy. It really is. But it's just, you know, and getting to know all those super talented people, all the people in the comic book scene, and getting to work with them and do stuff. There's just so much incredible memories to pull from that. It's almost hard to pick one in a lot of ways. It's just just the thought of I was going to meet Judd Nelson, the voice of Hot Rod, at some point in my life, and be able to take a photo with him. And just I'll never forget, because shout out to Pete Sinclair, who used to run BotCon back in the day. But Pete Sinclair made sure that I was first in line. I didn't even have to pay for my ticket. He gave me the ticket for free. So shout out to him, you know, free ticket to meet Judd Nelson, made sure I was first in line, and like schooled Judd Nelson like, yeah, this guy right here, this guy's the biggest hot rod fan in the world, one of the biggest Transformer pillars, and like make sure we get a good photo with him. So it was great stuff, just funny, hilarious stuff, and just I could go on meeting afterwards even the television version of Hot Rod and Rodimus and Dick Gautier, and being his liaison that weekend and hanging out with him and his lovely wife. Like, it was just so much great memories. And of course, meeting Peter Cullen multiple times and Frank Welker. Like, I almost feel like there isn't a Transformer voice actor I haven't met. It's like it's such a short list now of who I haven't met. It's nuts. So it's crazy when you think about it. It is, and it's nuts. Inspiration for the podcast. That was something that kind of came about, through the idea of when you create something, you want to create something that is currently not out there. I always feel that it's easy to just copy what everyone else is doing. It's another to kind of fill the void of what you feel is absent. And for people that aren't aware, the Transformer Slag Podcast first kind of started as Canadian Slag. It's kind of like the prototype for it in a lot of ways, which was at first we were like, why don't we make a podcast just for Canadian listeners? And at the time it was hosted on cybertron.ca, a Canadian Transformer website. And it literally was just the Canadian version of what a Transformer podcast would be. But as time progressed and, the staff changed throughout the years, so it used to be me and a crew of guys, and before you knew it, it was just like me, Jaws D, and a guy named Phil, Decepticon Army. And then when Phil got married, he kind of fell out of it, and it was just me and Jaws D in the end. And then me and Jaws D, we were just kind of like, hey, why don't we kind of make this more international, and we could just cover everything that people normally not talk about, and not just have it be, Canadian twisted, have it that the whole world could participate, and we could educate a larger portion of the world than just the Canadian portion of it. And it just evolved into what we have today, essentially. And then we moved it. It was originally just a long-form MP3 file on a small little server in iTunes. And they're like, let's take it to YouTube and make it more, mainstream and put it really out there. And then talk about topics that no one talks about. Trademarks, sculpting, design, because those were all things I had huge knowledge in because of being friends with those creators at Hasbro and all those people that were designers, and knowing that stuff, but really kind of relegating it only to like the odd panel at a convention or something and never really talking about it. Because at the time I shared a podcast with a lot of people who didn't have that knowledge, and to kind of bog it down and just make it about that would, not be fair to my co-hosts. So when it became just what it is today, I was able to kind of focus more on that, and it brought a lot of attention to the podcast because we talked about things that are much more of a logical twist on how this hobby works. Where when I used to kind of look at other podcasts, I just didn't feel that they understood how the inside baseball was, to use that term, and how things were actually working. And so I just felt that I had something to offer there. And I mean, not to brag, but we're the #1 Transformer podcast in the world as a result of that. Because we just have all the eyeballs now, because people are going to learn something. And I want people to learn something. It's really important that people learn how this hobby works. And now when I see people talk about trademarks and, partials with molds and everything like that, it makes me smile because I feel that they were listening and they're understanding now how things work and how you can predict what's going to be next more than anything else. And especially like afterwards, kind of the evolution of that is then doing stuff with Aaron Archer, with the Toy Armada, the other podcasts where we could talk about just toys in general and how those are created, as well as Transformer stuff on that podcast, where it's like, it's like, I almost feel like the podcast grows because of just those early ideas of filling the void of what wasn't there before. People who have touched me. First time I ever got I forget what year that was. I want to say 2010 or 2011. First time a fan ever wanted to take a picture with me. And I think like that was like, wow. And I remember I remember it as clear as day, where I was walking through the dealer room of, I believe it was TFCon 2011. I could be wrong. With Pia, and we were just talking about something, and then some fan ran up to us and was like, Proto Man, can I take a photo with you? And I right away, like, in my mind, I was like, oh, quick, say something humble. And I went, oh, you don't want to take a picture with Pia? He's right here, And, Pia thought it was so funny that, like, he took a photo of them taking a photo of me because it was just so funny. And you never forget stuff like that. And that was like, God, that was like over 10 years ago, So it's like, I still have that photo to this day. Maybe I'll post it in the thumbnail. I'll try to dig it up. And, stuff like that it's really humbling. It makes me feel good knowing that there's people out there that enjoy what I do. I mean, the one reflection that I always used to have, and this is such a Canadian thing though, but it was like, growing up in the 90s, there used to be this VJ host. They were called PJs, called PJ Phil. And any Canadian growing up in the 90s, this guy was like what we all ran home from school to watch. And everyone of my age demo knew who he was, And, years later, I look at it and I'm like, maybe I'm like almost on that kind of level where there's people that enjoy watching my content and they get something from it. I don't want to name names for their own privacy, but I know that there was one guy that contacted me who was going through a rough time in his life. And more, he felt that his hobby was becoming very political and negative, I guess is the best way to put it. And all the content that he was consuming related to his hobby were always making him angry afterwards and making him feel, negative, where it's like he likes something and this is supposed to be bringing him joy. And then when he watches content about it from other content creators, he was getting, leaving negative feelings. And then he would say, but when I would watch your content, it was never about negativity. It was always just, let's be rational about what's going on and make sense of things. And like I always say, like, once you leave the screen, the tablet, the computer, and you walk out your front door, you realize that the world isn't as crappy as you think it is. And I try to bring some of that positive energy to, the screen and stuff like that. It's something where, I remember there was a lot of artists. I get a lot of messages from artists that say that they love just having a voice to listen to while they work on their projects or their books or whatever, and to have positive, upbeat energy while doing that, because that's very important when it comes to doing comic books and drawing, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And they, you have the Transformer Slag Podcast live stream playlist, the Slag Live playlist, and they're able to have hours and hours and hours and hours of high energy talk to listen to while they're working on their latest book, and they feel that that's so important to them. And it's stuff like that to know, like, shout out to J.R. Mina on the other side of the globe in the Philippines, where, like, I'm part of his morning routine, whether he's doing the dishes, having breakfast with the family, or cleaning the kitchen. Those are the ones that really, they stick with you. When you know that, somewhere on the other side of the globe, there's someone that's enjoying, the sound of your voice and the things that you have to talk about because it matters to them. You're not just kind of parroting what the news is saying, but you're giving a better spin on it so it's understandable. It's crazy. It's crazy. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just being Canadian. I don't know. I've always felt that sometimes also is kind of my edge, is that by being Canadian, I don't have to take a stance politically, and I don't have to be left or right, and I don't have to be anything like that. I could just be Canadian and just be happy. Sweet as maple syrup and fattening as poutine. I don't know. What about the future? It says here, the future. Where do you see the podcast going in the future? I don't know, really. That's something I do think about sometimes. I always think about more, how could I create new kind of content that would still keep people interested? Because why would someone still, this podcast has been around for more than 10 years, but why would someone still want to watch for another 10 years? And I think it's just, as this hobby keeps evolving, new things keep coming out, I just want to make sure that people get the content that they feel is educational, upbeat, high energy. And when they watch that segment, even if it's one segment a day and it's only 9 to 10 minutes sometimes, that they get something out of it and they walk away with something positive. Because way too many times, it's every time I look at any feed, it's just negative, negative, negative. And it's negative because those content creators know that that's what gets views. And that's what stirs controversy, and they know that it's all about the money. And me, I don't want to go that route. I don't want to go the negative route, because even though maybe, it's going to give you more views, but I don't want that, because that's not healthy for the community, that there's negativity. And it's like, you don't have to look any further than go to a Hasbro Pulse live stream and just don't even, like, if you read that chat, it is just negativity to the ninth degree. And it's like, I don't ever want to encompass and project that kind of emotion, because it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Yeah, there is crappy stuff in the world, don't get me wrong, but I find that we tend to lean more on that kind of stuff than we do the positive. And there's tons of positive stuff in our fandom and our hobby and the people around us and everything like that. And to just kind of focus more on that. And you want the negativity, those guys are out there. You want to consume that, you're more than welcome to. But I'll only like talk about the negative stuff if I feel it has something to do more rationally with what our topic is. I'm not going to go looking for it. That's the thing, especially. I'll always try to see, the bright side of it. The glass is half full as much as it's half empty. And I'll still talk about the fact that it's half empty and what's going on there. But I'm also going to talk about how it's half full and what could still be filled up with positivity. There's a lot going on there. As for newer content, I would love to. I've talked about this with Jaws D in the past. Like, if I was ever rich, I'd have a studio and we could do live streams every day, and it would be much more organic. And it's just something in a more like live face-to-face podcast kind of thing. Because I'll be honest with you, whenever I have guests, I hate it being over Skype and having that like 1 second delay of audio, and sometimes we're talking over each other, and it's just much more organic to do a podcast that is face to face with a real human being, and the body language that's there when you're communicating with someone, it's so much more real. And all those times that I've hung out with those same people, whether it be Aaron Archer or back in the day with Derek Wyatt or Josh Perez or Alex Milne or any of those dudes, it's completely different when you're face-to-face than when it's over a Skype call or a Discord call or whatever, because you don't have that body language and energy there, and it's just not the same. And it goes the same with podcasts, and it's such a shame that, the TFCon that just passed, I wanted to do a live stream, from TFCon with a whole bunch of people. And of course, we all lost the internet. That was that huge blackout that happened with, Bell or something. And so that ended up not happening. But I mark my words, I'm going to try to do more stuff like that. The webcam, I got a nice brand new powerful laptop and a nice HD webcam. And there's going to be more of that in the future. I want to do more stuff where when I go out the cons, I could take a quiet moment, maybe just an hour out of that whole weekend, to just put out something and just record something with a bunch of people, just because it's a good way to footnote a time in history when we all hang out and we all talk about whatever's going on in the hobby at that time. But it's also a way to kind of just show how the face-to-face organic world that we live in today is a lot more real than the negative singular podcast segment world that we seem to see all the time on a daily basis. Again, it makes them money. But isn't there a way that you could make money and not have to ruin society? not be a downer? I don't know. That's always how I've tried to kind of look at it. Because, again, there's so many people that enjoy what I do positively. And they enjoy what I do without me having to go down a negative route. So it's something where I'd like to see more of that. and be able to create more of that. Again, doing the other podcast, doing the Toy Armada with Aaron Archer, and looking at the past and even bad toy lines, historically bad toy lines, and trying to look at them and understand the creative process and how they go about it, because no one goes out of their way to create something negative. When you're creating content, you never create it to be negative. You create it hoping it's going to be positive and it's going to be well received, especially when it's toys and cartoons and TV shows and movies. And when you go back and you talk about the creative process, there's only positivity that could really come from that discussion, because when it's being creative, you're only hoping for the best and being positive about it. What happens afterwards is a different story. So hope that answers it a little bit. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. Like, again, the podcast is going to be around for a long time. I promise you that. It's something that I've managed to schedule into my life very well. It's something where maybe the Saturday night live streams might be a little more spotty in the future, when I'm going to be able to travel more after the Big V, which you could probably tell by, as of this recording, if you're listening to this later, is still a thing. Is still a thing, unfortunately. Where they're starting to open up now. I mean, it's something where when I'm going to be able to travel more and do things on a Saturday, yeah, maybe the live streams might be affected, but then I'll just move them. I'll move them to like a Sunday night or Monday night or something. There's always somewhere in the world someone feels that that's the best day to do it. I once asked, I was like, when would be the best day to do it? And any day is good for anyone. So it's just something where I'll see where that might have to evolve in the future and where that might end up. But otherwise, we're going to keep marching forward, keeping you educated, keeping you informed, like I always say, which is the most important thing, because there's always misinformation out there. There's always incorrect stuff. There's always people just liking to stir the pot, which is, yeah, that's their thing, I guess. Some people like to watch the world burn. I don't know where that's coming from, but everyone has their own story there. But it is what it is, and I hope that answers your question, Billy B. And thank you for being a long time patron. One of the first. And just amazing stuff. Hope you guys stick around as long as you can and supporting the podcast and everything like that, like Billy B. And, of course, Patreon being one of the best ways to do that, as well, of course, watching the podcast, liking, commenting, subscribing, all of that goes a long way. I usually don't say like, comment, subscribe, but it does make a difference with the YouTube algorithms. Again, my lack of negativity might actually bury a lot of my segments, because, it's much more important for them to highlight bad things than good things. But thanks for everything, guys. Thank you for all the love and support and everything. Like I always say, it's like how I end my live streams. Go out there, enjoy yourselves. It's a beautiful world out there. There's a lot of cool stuff and a lot of cool people, and take care of yourselves.